Greetings and welcome to the third mini lecture on the Constitution, which will be the second mini lecture on Hobbes. In the first mini lecture on Hobbes, I made the point that Hobbes placed a priority on order and security, and I believe the primary reason for this is that Hobbes lived during a very insecure time. He lived during a civil war situation in Britain. The continent of Europe was ravaged by a religious war, and as a result, he believed the primary purpose of government, the reason why people want a government, is to protect them from such wretched conditions. Note that besides prioritizing order, he believed in a strong monarch, in a strong king. Once again, not because he believed in the divine right of kings. He rejected that. He urged a separation of church and state, as I discussed in the previous mini lecture, but instead believed that it was the most efficient form of government. And in this particular case, I believe the best way to look at government through Hobbes's eyes is to look at government as being like a tool. We as people create tools to perform certain tasks. And in this particular case, the task of government is to provide order, to provide a rule of law. And of course, just like any tool, if the government cannot or will not perform that, they have the right to revolt. And of course, that notion of government being formed by a social contract, and if it's broken by either party, there are consequences. And I will discuss that in more length in this mini lecture. So to me, the big question when I was studying political theory is why would people give up so much freedom? Why would people give up attempts at equity or equality? And Hobbes's response to my question, and certainly I took political theory at the undergraduate level, and the answer is that Hobbes says that freedom and equality are only valuable if you have order as a prerequisite. So Hobbes asks people to consider, what would life be like if government did not exist? What if there was societal anarchy and no government? And he calls this the state of nature. And political theorists are divided. I've actually worked with two of them that had competing visions on this. One believed that this was just a mental device that Hobbes used to illustrate the concept. Another theorist believed that Hobbes believed that there actually at one time was a state of nature. Now, Hobbes's view of the state of nature is that it would be a struggle for survival. And underline that in your notes, star it. It's certainly something you're likely to see on the exam. When I ask, how did Hobbes view life in the state of nature? It would be a struggle for survival, a perpetual state of war. And I gave you Hobbes's famous quotation from the Leviathan, where he says that life in the state of nature would be solitary, nasty, brutish, and short. And the primary reason for this is if government didn't exist, your life would be under perpetual threat. Because Hobbes claims that even if you believe that most people are good, you don't know who the few bad ones are. And the trouble is think about this. The smallest person in this class, if we were to meet face to face, could potentially imperil everyone's life if they brought, say, an automatic weapon to class. Or if they were very charming and engaging and they brought their friends and they could take us out if they were allied. Hobbes says because you don't know if other members of your society are safe or not, you would have to assume the worst. And this would create a security dilemma in society. And miscalculations, misperceptions would create a spiral of descent into this struggle for survival, or perpetual state of war. So, most importantly, if you look down to 4, to escape the wretched state of nature, people form governments through mutual consent, and this is the social contract. And if you think about this, you and I have engaged in contracts. I'll tell you a story that maybe you may find enjoyable, you may not. Um, when I got married, my wife said, someday when we get a new car, I get the new car. It's in our interest. And at the time, I was making $800 as a teaching assistant at UC Davis. So I said, yeah, when we get the new Ferrari, it's all yours. And I kind of laughed, and she kind of looked at me sternly. So I was driving a 1969 Chevy Impala lowrider. It was green with a white top. She was driving a 1968 Ford Torino at the time. So we were both driving old jalopies and barely getting by, living in a small one-bedroom apartment in Sacramento. And then something strange happened. We had a child 3.5 years after we were married, and our parents could not believe we were driving around with our baby. Her name's Kristen. She's now 32. And as my mom called it, an old jalopy without heat and air conditioning. So my mom and my wife's parents got a huge down payment for a new car for this baby who, I kind of joked, well, we're going to buy the baby a stick or an automatic. And so my wife said, now remember, I get the new car. It's in our interest. So I go, "Oh, well, I understand how it's in your interest. And I don't really understand how it's in mine." And she said, well, you're not very smart, are you? You if you got the new car, you'd have me drive the old car till car parts were falling off. So if every time you buy me a new car, you get my old car and we sell your old car, you'll have an incentive to buy me a new car as often as possible. So she had me whipped. So we went and bought a new car. She wanted a Ford Taurus wagon, and we signed a contract. And in that contract, it was my obligation to make 48 payments to Ford Credit. And Ford had an obligation because with this car, we got a 100,000 mile almost bumper to bumper warranty. It was a very, very good warranty. So I decided to test the contract. I made the first 8 payments. And then the 9th payment, I deliberately withheld payment. I thought, I was a young guy at the time. I thought, Ford Credit's a big company. They have lots of accounts, and if I don't make the payment, maybe they won't notice I'll get a free car. You can guess they did notice. They started out with a really nice notice. In fact, almost seemed like they were apologizing to me, so I still didn't make the payment. And then the second warning scared the heck out of me, and I sent the payment in immediately. So in this particular case, with my contract, I had an obligation. And if I had failed to pay, Ford could have taken the car. They could have repossessed it. So there were consequences for not living up to the contract. Now, this car, surprisingly, may be the only good Ford Taurus wagon ever made. When I got rid of it, and yeah, we bought my wife a new car, and I took her car over. And when I sold the car, it still had 262,000 miles on the original engine. So it may hold the record for the best Ford Taurus wagon made because if you go on to Consumer Reports, this vehicle does not have a very, very good track record. The car did have a fatal flaw. It lost water pumps, and I went to the dealership, and every single time that I had a problem with the water pump, and I think it was 3 or 4 of them that I lost. And then finally they put a new model water pump in, and I never had to replace it again. But they didn't charge me. But if they had said, we're not going to honor our contract, we are, in this particular case, we only said that to get you to buy the darn car, then I would have had recourse. I could have taken Ford to court and sue. So in a social contract, Hobbes's claim is this works like a business contract. Both parties have obligations, and if the contract is broken by either party, there are penalties. So, for example, in a social contract involving government, we as people have to obey the law. And if we disobey the law, uh, maybe we get fined. This happened to me one time driving to Stanislaus State. I was driving from Merced. I'd been in a meeting. I was running a little bit behind, so I hit the accelerator and I got caught by the highway patrol near Livingston at the Sultana exit. So I had to pay a fine because I broke the law. If you violate perhaps other laws, the penalty might be harsher. You might have to go to jail or to prison. And in many states, you can even be put to death, for example, if you engage in first-degree murder. So you have to obey the law, and if you don't, there are potential consequences. But Hobbes also says that, if the government cannot perform its job, right? And I told you earlier, for Hobbes, the job of government is to provide order and security, then people have the right to revolt and create a government that will provide order and security. Now, when we get to John Locke, he's going to say that the purpose of government is to protect people's natural liberties, life, liberty, and property. Thomas Jefferson in the Declaration of Independence says that the purpose of government is to protect the life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness of the people. And so our revolution, the American Revolution, the Declaration of Independence, and the reason that we, the colonists, because before the Declaration of Independence, we were Englishmen who were in revolt against our government. It was a rebellion. But once we declared independence, and our independence was justified in the social contract theory terms. Thomas Jefferson lists 56 ways in which he, King George, has violated the social contract he has with us, his subjects. And therefore, for the first time in the history of the world, think about that. For the first time in the history of the world, a colony separates itself from a mother country and justifies that separation through the eyes of social contract theory. Now, Hobbes is not a believer in democracy or a republic, as I have listed at the end of that fourth point in your notes. Hobbes is an advocate for a strong monarch because he believes that monarchy is much more efficient than republics. Hobbes is skeptical of republics. He believes that they're inherently unstable, that they often degenerate into squabbling matches. And certainly, if you would look at the quagmire, for example, on this additional stimulus relief package, where Democrats and Republicans are squabbling about how much relief should our citizens get and how much aid should they get from the government. They have been squabbling and, in fact, have recently adjourned without a settlement. Hobbes would say you don't have these problems when one person, in this case a strong monarch, makes those decisions. In the next mini lecture, we will move to our second social contract theorist, John Locke. Locke writes a book called The Second Treatise of Government, and Locke is the intellectual guru for Thomas Jefferson and for many of our founding fathers. So this will have more direct application to American government than Hobbes, but Hobbes is also important for giving us this foundation of social contract theory to begin. Hope you're enjoying the lectures. Please let me know if the lecture pace is too fast or too slow. Have a great day.